We are seeing the rise of the Gestapo in the free world, the sacred honor of our elected officials, and the reasons to laugh at Democrats. I'm Josiah Everton, and this is The Glorious Rescue.
Aren't you tired of feeling forced to choose between staying informed and being indoctrinated? Listen to the condensed news cycle without the lies, agendas, and confusion from the mainstream media, all while engaging in deeper discussions about the principles that have influenced our great nation. This is what rescuing America looks like. This is The Glorious Rescue.
Welcome back to another episode of The Glorious Rescue. When I say reasons to laugh at Democrats, don't get me wrong, to all of the liberal-leaning listeners here on the show, I'm not broad brushing every single Democrat or anything like that. I'm just specifically going to mention a few Democrats, a few Democratic policies that I think pretty much the majority of Americans can agree on. So I apologize to all of you. I'm not broad brushing all of you, but we are going to get into some humorous items. We're going to share some laughs, share some tears as we talk about really the idea of the rule of law decreasing in America and in the free world in general. And that's really what we're transitioning to right away. By the way, in our last episode, it was January 1st, so my apologies. Happy New Year's to all of you as listeners. I hope 2020 wasn't too bad for you, and I hope 2021 is better. We have lots to cover as always, so we're going to be rolling right through all the stories and into our end of show segment. Really, today we're going to be contrasting the elected officials and our elected officials currently, what we're seeing as far as politicians and why they're called politicians and not public servants, as far as the vast majority of them, and contrasting them with public servants back in the colonial era. So I'm very excited about that. Today, very first story, we're going to be talking about the rise of the Gestapo, first of all in Canada, and that is on New Year's Eve in a city in near western Quebec area. There was a neighbor that notified the police, and this is according to an article I read over here at the Daily Wire by Hank Berrien. It says here that the police arrived just before midnight, under the cover of darkness, basically, to arrest these individuals. Why? Because a member of a different address was found in the house of someone with a different address. That is correct. If your address on file or whatever it is in a certain record as that address, and you are found in a different address right now because of COVID and all of their health policies or whatnot, if you're found in a different address, you are, according to the health code, breaking the law. And so there was a group of 6 individuals. The neighbor called the police. The police arrived just before midnight. Like I said, and the video went viral. A video surfaced of the police arresting them, and there was a violent brawl that broke out between 2 of the residents and the police being arrested. You're being arrested just because you're in a family member's house, a friend's house. We don't necessarily know the relation, but obviously there was some relation because it was New Year's Eve, sharing the house. And then also, it doesn't stop. We say, okay, well, that's Canada. Canada's a little crazy. Canada's a little liberal, a little leftist, and to which I would agree with you. Very socialist country, moving towards that at least. Well, so is New York. And unfortunately, there's the possibility of similar items coming up in New York. Why do I say that? That is because a recent bill in the New York State Assembly would amend the public health law and allow the Governor Cuomo, wonderful Cuomo, because we know he has all the discretion, the overarching and all discretionary review. That is Andrew Cuomo. He has the ability. It permits the ability. This bill would to remove or detain individuals that he deems a probable case, a possible carrier, a possible contact for the contagious disease, someone who would, quote, pose an imminent and significant threat to the public health. So if good old Cuomo, sitting on his throne, sipping his tea and eating his crumpets, if he thinks that this individual is a suspected case, if he thinks that this person poses an imminent or significant threat to the public health, he can detain the individual, he can remove the individual, or just do whatever he wants. It's up to his discretionary review. Now, I will say, props to the individual who wrote this bill, because they obviously didn't want to throw out completely the idea of the rule of law, because the individual who is arrested or detained because they pose an imminent threat, deemed by Cuomo, he or she cannot be detained for any longer than 60 days. So you have to have past 60 days, you have to have, an arrest warrant, like America usually works and the rule of law usually operates in America. So this is Assembly Bill A416. Again, giving Cuomo basically all discretionary review to arrest anyone he deems a threat to public health. This is some serious Gestapo stuff. When I say Gestapo, I'm talking secret police in the middle of the night, arresting, killing, right? Obviously, this isn't killing, but you understand what I'm saying. Government coercion in the middle of the night type stuff that we're seeing rising in the free world. So they're obviously raising some serious concerns. Another thing raising serious concerns is our wonderful Congress. I'm talking assembly and state. When it comes to the United States Congress, Senate, House of Representatives, there's not much agreeing. I think we obviously know that. It took them how many months to come up with a stimulus package that they still didn't really agree on. But when it comes to those two houses and the split, the polarizing split, the partisanship between Republican and Democrat, well, there's one thing that they agree on, and that is being as greedy as it comes. When it comes to money, they will take it all. When it comes to money, because again, it is not their money. Whose money is it? It is our money. And again, I go back to them making 174, 180, 200K a year. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the humorous section that I was mentioning to you. But when it comes to money, they can agree on it. And when it comes to making all this money and then deciding how they're going to spend our money, they do so quite liberally, and they enjoy doing so. A recent example of this is the whole COVID package. If you remember, I did not think Trump should have signed that COVID stimulus package. I think it was poorly written. I think it was bad. I think it was a threat to the American economy. But he passed it nevertheless, and he did veto that almost $800 billion defense spending bill. That's at least something we can agree on. Almost $1 trillion of useless spending, keeping troops in areas that aren't necessarily necessary. But the House and the Senate both overturned the veto. The way it works, obviously, if you are going to pass a standard bill in the House or in the Senate, it has to pass with a majority, over 50% of the representatives in the House, respectively. It has to be passed in one and then passed in the second, both with a 50% majority. It then goes to the president's desk, in which he can sign it into law. He can also veto it, or he can just let it go. And it differs state by state, but basically if you let it slide, then it will automatically go into law, specifically in California, but in general as well. So he can do either three of those, and he did veto this bill, rightfully so. Again, almost $1 trillion spending bill that is not already in the budget. Like, we're just talking about, oh, hey, let's spend another $1 trillion because, that's what we do. When we go on our spending splurge, I'll be honest, I went on a spending splurge this week. I'm not even talking $1,000. These guys, $1 trillion. So their spending splurges are quite rough. But anyways, what I'm trying to get to is the fact that when they voted on spending all of this useless money, the Senate voted 81-13. Could you imagine any other bill besides a spending bill getting passed in either house with an 81-13 majority? So like I was saying, once Trump or the president vetoes that bill, it then goes back to the states, to which they have to have a super majority, meaning a 2/3 majority for them to overturn the veto from the president. And 81-13 is well over that 67%. So 81-13 in the Senate. In the House, just as bad, with a 322-87 override. Absolutely ridiculous, because again, when it comes to money, that is something that they can most definitely radically agree on without hesitation, because again, it's our money, it's not theirs. Something that they cannot agree on is the whole election and certifying the election and whatnot. And so there's more contention, more developments with the election. If you remember in our recent episode, we talked about the whole idea of Pence having the ability that, because he has the ability to count the votes, that he has the ability to choose which votes. And I said, I don't really think it's really constitutional. I don't think it's really either likely as happening either. Well, that was, again, contingent on a lawsuit that was filed allowing Pence, if you remember, I mentioned Pence, to do so. And the judge did dismiss the effort to basically allow Pence that opportunity. And the judge dismissed the effort based on a lack of standing, because it was like some Arizona representative or something like that. But something that is still going on and continuing in place is Ted Cruz and GOP senators and some in the House stating that they will not vote, or that they will vote against the electors in disputed states. So the way this will work is, obviously, as the votes are being counted, the House and the Senate, they vote on it, and they certify the electoral votes being cast or whatnot. And so you have many different members of the House, many different members of the Senate saying that they are going to, they have signed a letter announcing their intent to vote against the electors in the disputed states area. Again, this is not in an overarching for the entire election. This is just in specific states that they feel like the election audit should continue. And they signed this letter. Ted Cruz was the one who headed it up in the Senate for the GOP. And he signed this letter. He wrote this letter basically saying that this is not to overthrow the democratic process of our elections in America, but just to protect it. And because we want to protect it and we hold it very valuable, we are going to vote against the electors in the disputed states, and we will not vote for it until the election audit is conducted. This doesn't necessarily mean another election audit will continue or will again happen, but it is just more members of the House, more members of the Senate making election statements. Now, we're going to move into some of those humorous items that I mentioned we're going to be discussing. There's just a couple different stories, and I try to do this because I like to show the hypocrisy, because I hope it gives us some laughs. I mean that genuinely. I think the news cycle is one that can be very discouraging. And so that is why I try to have those end of show segments where at the end of the show, we get into those deeper discussions that really are more underlying to the problems we see in America, but I think more encouraging, more passionate, and I think definitely more enlightening and educational and informational and applicable. So to kind of take the eyes and shift the discouragement from the current events, I do believe that is essential. I think also on top of that, having sometimes some of these more humorous stories that is a little bit more lighthearted, just a little bit of jest and making fun of the sacred honor of our elected officials, and then contrasting them in our end of show segment, like I said today. I think it gives us that humor side. It helps kind of ease that burden. And so I do hope that that's helpful to you. I hope that if it's something that you enjoy and something that you agree with, and kind of that whole message that I just said right there is something that you agree with, I do hope that you would continue to share these episodes. I would ask really quickly, as you're listening right now, just click the very top of your browser. If you're watching over on that YouTube channel, just click that right there, copy it, and then go over to one person who you don't think has ever listened to the show, maybe 3 people or maybe 5 people that have never listened to the show, and just paste it into your messages, send them that message and say, check it out. I would greatly appreciate it. Again, like I said in the last episode, that does mean if they do watch it, that they will find out that you sent it to them because I asked you to, but that's okay. So what am I referring to? And that is a recent Q&A session over a virtual press conference, basically from the Biden team. It closed down the chat. They were allowing a Q&A session. Again, it is a Q&A session on Zoom, and I'm very familiar with Zoom. So I would imagine many of us are familiar with Zoom, whether it be jobs, schooling, because of 2020 and COVID and all of that. There's a Q&A session. And so if you disable the chat, you're basically disabling the Q&A that you're inherent in the idea of the Biden team hosting a Q&A session is to have people asking Qs, questions, and then giving A's, answers. It's in the name, right? And so they disabled that function after being asked some tough questions. So this was quite humorous. They were reportedly and apparently calling on just the New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, PBS, and Political. And they were given the opportunity to ask questions. But news outlets, mainstream media news outlets, yes, those are technically mainstream media outlets. But are they? Are they? But actual legitimate mainstream media outlets like the Associated Press were shut out. They didn't ask any questions during this time. And so once they were starting to wind down the press conference, you had a whole bunch of people giving comments like, hey guys, there's tons of folks looking to ask questions. And since this is being done once a week, could we please go longer or at least hold more frequent briefings? That was from the Daily Beast. And then according to the Associated Press answered, any chance you could take a few more questions? There are a lot of folks here with questions. Another individual asked, is there a point in saying we want to ask questions if you only call on the same group every single week? And there was the very obvious impact from this, and that was that the Biden team rarely had to answer questions, tough questions. They didn't really have to answer the questions about Hunter Biden and his son. They would just give, the very general answer of, Joe Biden's very proud of his son and the work he's done and all that, just the typical statements. But there were many complaints, many public complaints about it, obviously, because they were only answering easy questions or questions from your CNN, your, Washington Post and all that. And so per Fox News, there was a statement saying, quote, the Biden transition team appears to have disabled the public chat function on its transition Zoom calls, a place where I and others had been routinely complaining to them to take more questions. That is from actually a Political editor, Sam Stein, and that is from apparently per Fox News. So many people, they disabled the chat, and they are trying to avoid the questions because obviously they don't want to answer the questions. Joe Biden doesn't want to answer the questions. He can't even answer the easy questions without tripping over himself. Another one is the proposed House rules eliminating the use of father, son, sister, and all that. So now, apparently, according to some recent House rules, it has not been confirmed yet, but if these rules were to pass and these resolutions were to pass, you cannot use terms like that, father, son, mother, in the House, in the Senate, and whatnot. The funny part is Pelosi has the term like mother, daughter, friend, or something like that in one of her social media profiles. So just more idiocy from our elected officials. Here's another example of Pelosi. One of her most recent quotations, actually. I should say this, that it is actually quotations when used as a noun, not quotes. So a little fun fact for you there. Oh yeah, we haven't been doing fun facts on the show. Okay, I got to get back to it really quickly so we can make sure we have ample time for end of show segments. She said basically the coronavirus pandemic has, quote, pulled back the curtain to reveal further disparities in our income and in our society. Clearly, the disparities in income and equity in our country are vast. I don't really know who she's referring to other than herself, because again, I go back to how much she makes per year doing honestly nothing. So if she's trying to talk about disparities in income in society, I really think that... Does she really believe in her mind that everyone makes what she makes? I can't get over that. I cannot get over the fact that Nancy Pelosi sits on her throne with her little crown and her little wand waving and blessing the Americans after 6 months with $600 after shutting down all of their businesses. And she says that there are income disparities and equity disparities in our American economy and in our incomes. Like, no duh, Nancy Pelosi. But the best part is she talks about how the disparities have gotten worse. The funny thing about it is and the blowback that she's gotten from it is that she owns a $24,000 fridge. Yes, I'm not joking. And when I say that, I'm talking about the contents as well. Reagan Battalion in a Twitter comment said the ice cream she has in her fridge costs more than the salary the average American makes in a month. Another person commented, is she talking about herself and regular Americans here? Yeah, the income disparity, the equity disparity is huge between the average American and her. Another individual, oddly, even after the decades in office and millions in personal wealth, they never volunteer to reduce or donate their congressional salary. Again, just another, you can find the video on Twitter where she talks about the way to keep her spirits up during these trying times is to fill up her freezer, and her freezer and the contents and the ice cream in general, $24,000. Joe Biden replied, "You have great taste." I can't get over this. Now, granted, if you work and you save your own money and you amass your wealth to where you want to spend $24,000 on a fridge, all to you, power to you. Like, you spend your money the way you want to, and I'm proud of you for being able to make the money to where you have no problem buying a $24,000 fridge. I got no problem with that. But when you basically, your salary is on the backs of the American people, and you are trying to hypocritically talk about the income disparity in America while you make the amount that you make, when you got people, Americans in general, basically, trying to scrape by, and you're talking about all of that, and you have a $24,000 fridge, it's ridiculous. Anyways, that's kind of indicative of our public servants, the sacred honor of our public servants today in America and in American politics. It is very unfortunate. It's kind of what we're looking at here now. And Nancy Pelosi, obviously indicative of a large group of elitists in our American politics, but that's very strikingly contrasting politicians. I wouldn't even call them public politicians, I would call them public servants way back when in the colonial era. So that is why we are discussing, for our end of show segment, really the elected officials during the founding era. Welcome back to another segment of the founding era. Like I mentioned, the goal of this segment is to contrast the difference between people like Nancy Pelosi, our elected officials, and the elitism that they have. Again, the mentality that they are better than us and they sit higher than us and rules for thee, but not for me. And that sort of mentality, contrasting them with the individuals back during the founding era that sacrificed truly their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor for us. If you remember the Declaration of Independence, they pledged their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. And so we're just going to briefly, because we only have a few minutes, just run through some of those sacrifices of their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, so that you can kind of see the difference between the two. If you remember, we had an interview with Senator Mike Morrell, and in that, Mike Morrell talked about the difference between a statesman and a politician. And he talked about how we, as just normal Americans, can emulate those patriotic qualities, those statesmanship-like qualities. If you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend you go back and listen to it. I want to say it was episode 13. And then there was another episode, several episodes after that, where he interviewed me. That is another good one right there. But what I'm trying to say is that there are statesmen and there are politicians. Today we have many, many politicians, and there are statesmen today, obviously, but there is a huge difference between the two. And so let me just run through some of those for you. Like I said, the Declaration of Independence, sacrificing their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. Kind of breaking it up. There are many people who sacrificed their lives, many people who sacrificed their fortunes, and many who sacrificed their sacred honor. So it's hard to kind of break it up in categories because some sacrificed multiple, or they sacrificed all three. So, for instance, one I think of is John Hancock. John Hancock, obviously, that's where we get the term signing or putting your John Hancock down, your signature down. And John Hancock had the largest signature on the Declaration of Independence. I wish I had the Declaration of Independence right here. I have the Constitution, or just the first portion. But in the Declaration of Independence, he had the largest signature on there. And when asked why, he said basically to the effect of, so that the King of England does not have to use his spectacles to see my signature. John Hancock was a vastly wealthy individual. He inherited a very large portion, a very large farm, very large business, or very large property, I should say, an estate. And he very quickly got into the mercantile business and was wildly successful. John Hancock died basically penniless, basically fortuneless, because he consistently depleted his resources for the cause, for the patriotic cause, and for the patriots that were during the 1770s and the 1780s, early 1780s, fighting the war for independence against the British. That's just one example. I think of Robert Morris. Robert Morris was an individual who was vastly wealthy. In fact, in 1774, according to many reports, he was arguably the wealthiest man in America. And then here, according to All Things Liberty, it says here he could have sat out the war in relative luxury, or certainly even, as some merchants did, made a huge profit during the war. Instead, hearing the call to patriotism, Morris signed on to boycott British goods. I won't continue, but he took a large stand, countless times putting his own credit on behalf of the government or the American patriotic cause and the patriot cause. He actually let them use his line of credit for supplies. Well, at the end of his life, he came into huge financial trouble. His family lost everything, and he was eventually arrested. And he spent his last years in debtor's prison because he died penniless. Again, died in debtor's prison because he had no money, sacrificing their fortune. Of the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence, 12 fought in battles as members of state militias, 5 were captured and imprisoned during the Revolutionary War, 17 lost property as a result of British raids, and 5 lost all of their fortunes in helping fund the Continental Army and state militias battle the Redcoats. These men were men of huge sacrifice, men of huge stature, willing to sacrifice, like I said, their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. I just gave you just two, who sacrificed their entire fortune. Many of them joining the militia, like I said, 12, just literally signed on as members of the militia to actually pick up a gun and go battle against the oppressive Redcoats. Many of them, like I said, imprisoned. I think of one was Hayward, and Hayward then he lost all of his fortune as well. He was imprisoned, and during prison, his wife died. Some of his children died, and also he then lost his estate, I believe. So here he was in prison. He had no idea. He finally gets out of prison, and everything he had was gone. Those are just some of the examples. I think of another one, Nathan Hale, who, when he was captured and asked what his dying words were, what were his regrets, he said, "My only regret is that I have but one life to lose for my country. The only thing I can ever regret is that I can only sacrifice my life once for the beautiful American experiment, for the idea of liberty and for the tree of liberty." Nathan Hale was one of those individuals. So many individuals who did the same, who sacrificed their lives, their fortunes, like I said, and the idea of sacred honor, being that many people, that everyone who joined the cause lost some sort of their honor. They were considered dishonorable men. There were many private businesses that were loyalists. And you, as a patriot, if you were known as a patriot, you were not allowed in that business because you were considered dishonorable. You were considered a threat or a traitor to the crown. All of those men who signed that declaration, all of the patriots in general, not even the ones who signed the declaration, were men who lost some portion of their honor. But I would say looking back, that history deems them much more honorable men than what they were thought of back in the 1700s. And then also you have people like Washington. You have people who didn't necessarily lose their fortunes, didn't necessarily lose their lives, but then come to the end of the war, come to then the institution of the American system, then they were given huge opportunities in politics. George Washington could have been named king of America, and everyone would have been okay with it, but he didn't. And he served his 2 terms as president and could have served more terms, and he didn't. He walked away, went back home to his farm, and there served out the remainder of his life. Men who could have then used their political experience or their heroic experiences during the war to serve personal interest, and they did no such thing. That really is going to wrap up the end of show segment here. I know a brief segment, but really, again, the purpose, to contrast the idea of what it means to be a true statesman and who were the true statesmen versus the unfortunate, the drought of statesmen that we have in American politics today, and the elitism of our elected officials, really just politicians, just there to serve personal interest or just to serve what they think is right and not really what is truly the best for our nation. I hope that is... I know maybe a little bit discouraging that we don't have them today in American politics, and we do, but not as many as obviously as we need. But I hope encouraging to you in the sense that we can attain to have those same qualities. We really, as Senator Mike Morrell mentioned in that segment back in episode 13, I do believe it was, where he mentions how we can emulate those same qualities and we can attain and aspire to be those same type of men and women who protect the torch of liberty and pass it on to our posterity. Again, if that is a torch that you want to preserve, you hold dear, and you want to pass on to your children and your children's children, again, I do hope you hit that subscribe button, share this episode with everyone, leave us good reviews and ratings. It is always appreciated. And don't forget to tune in again on Friday for another episode of The Glorious Rescue. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Josiah Everton, and this is The Glorious Rescue.